So, welcome to the library, and I'm focusing in here on a small part of the puppet and theater section. And I am very happy because I have my entire theater and puppet library here now. And I thought I would share some parts of it with you because you may not have any interest in puppets or theater, but nevertheless, maybe you will see some point to it later. This is a large encyclopedia of dance, which I think is well worth the time spent to peruse. Here are a few of the books, the dance books, books on general theater, history of the theater, as well as theater theory, and you'll see different names there, many of them probably unfamiliar with you. And here we have things related to puppetry like dolls or circuses, clowns, things like that. And also stage magic, which I've been fascinated with ever since I've known my friend Greg Young, who is a stage magician. And then we come to the serious puppetry books, starting with the French Encyclopedia of Marionettes, which we will look at in a little more depth later on. And we're going to look at some of these books in much more depth as we go. And more books of various aspects of puppetry, including shadow puppets and very specifically marionettes. And here we have books from the Tone Marionette Theater in Brussels. That's a very rare book. We'll look at that. And Richard Teschner from Austria, and as well as Czech puppetry, Česká loutka. And then we have some books by some of my favorite people, Jan Schwankmeyer, the Quay brothers, as well as you can see some of their video discs as well. And so there you have it. And let's look at a few of these books. We'll start off with just a general Oxford companion to theater. By the way, these Oxford books that are encyclopedias and such, they're better if they're not very contemporary. And the reason for that is they're filled with a kind of bias towards the recent, and particularly the recent political ideologies. And for my money, the whole point of studying theater, puppetry, dance, all of these things is not to focus on the present, but to focus on the art in its broader connotations. So that was a book of ballet. What else have we got here? Oh, these are really good. These are a couple books I picked up in Scotland a few years ago, The Medieval Stage. And there's a nice section in there on the use of puppets. But of course, that's the great thing about having these books is they refer back to each other, which is the reason I don't just have puppetry books, because I want to understand the larger context. And this is the book of dolls and a few puppets that are meant to fill up the doll museum, which someday will be created in Georgia. And in fact, this was the reason I was brought to Georgia, was because I was under the assumption that I would help to create a doll and puppet museum, which unfortunately has never come to pass. Another book on the history of the Commedia dell'arte. And then this is a great book on American circuses, which are different than circuses in many other parts of the world by the fact that they are almost exclusively traveling circuses. In Europe, you often have circuses in one building in the city, and maybe a traveling troupe will come, but it's not the same as these large tents. I love the posters and the imagery that was used to advertise on the streets. I mean, look at that elephant. So, again, and there are many connections to circuses and clowns. Here is a book, a very fascinating book that I picked up in London on my way back recently in April. And this is a book on clowns and pantomimes. It was written in the 1920s. And they have, again, the Commedia dell'arte figures, but the clowning, the tradition we now know, basically comes out of the Commedia dell'arte. I look forward to researching it with that book more. Many of these books are bought for reference purposes, like this Dictionary of Puppetry by Mr. A.R. Philpott, which I've gotten far too much out of, that little book. Here's a great book with a lot of pictures of masks in it. Next to it is a book that tells you how to make masks. And again, masks and puppetry are kind of natural mates. And this is the Encyclopédie Mondiale, meaning the World Encyclopedia of the Art of the Puppet. Marionnette in French is the same as puppets in English, and doesn't just mean string puppets. So the great thing about this, now the English translation is online, but it doesn't have the photos and such. And I bought this before that was online, and if someone said there was an English edition, I would buy it immediately. I think that one costs money. So this is a book, an older book that's a survey of puppetry. So there's Japanese puppets, I can see Czech puppets there, and puppets from around the world. Spabel and Hervinek are the Czech puppets in that picture that we just passed. These kinds of books are great for just showing you the realm of puppetry, and I have several of these books. I'm not going to show you the best one, which is The Art of the Puppet by Bill Baird, mostly because the cover isn't that interesting. Here's one, Les Marionnettes, The Puppets, a French survey book, and of course they're going to major more in French puppets. And the more recent one, this is from about 10 years ago by Eileen Blumenthal, is basically, what is it, The World of Puppetry or something like that? It just says puppetry on the cover, but there's more to it. But this is a good recent survey of puppetry. Now, I do have one, again, we're getting closer to the present times, and then you start getting categories, which to my mind just get too political, so... nevertheless, there's a lot of great information in this book. Unfortunately, this book is 10 years old. If it was written last year, it would probably be insufferable, and I might not pick it up. One of the reasons I really love puppetry is the obscurity of it, including, here is the first history of puppetry from France, Histoire de Marionnette. And here's a more of a how-to book by, I like that name, Edith Flack Ackley. And this tells you more how to make puppets. It also gives you some puppet plays. It's a book about marionettes and with little illustrations and plays and such like that. So, wonderful stuff. And I like getting these old books. Again, I like the fact that the information is not contemporary, because we need inspiration for us. This is Chinese shadow puppetry. This is a German book, which I can read the French. It's harder for me to poke through the German. But then again, I bought this for all of these illustrations of Chinese shadow puppets. And it's the illustrations that give one the idea, the inspiration for more. If you're getting my message, I'm not a fan of just simply postmodern puppetry, we'll say. So here's another book. This is by the International Puppetry Institute in Charleville-Mézières. And it's an interesting book. And I've been there several times. They graciously give me some of what you would call their yearbooks. Every 3 years they go through a different promotion, as they call it, promotion. And I really appreciate having these books that show me who the students were at different times. And here's a great book I picked up on the Salzburg Marionette Theater, which is a place which has been important to me. Their style isn't so important to me as much as just the quality of their presentation. And Richard Teschner is an Austrian who gets my vote for probably the most beautiful marionettes. There's Mr. Teschner. The most beautiful marionettes that have ever been made. This book doesn't do it service. There you get an idea. The picture on the right. His work is well worth discovering. You can find his work in reality at the Austrian Theatre Museum. And here's a book by Nina Efimova on Russian puppetry, and this was an English translation because she talks about the adventures of Russian puppet theater, and she would go around and travel. Now here is the only book that I know of thus far, there may be other books but I don't know about them, on Georgian puppetry, and this is by a friend of mine, Bachana Halvashi, and he's around my age. I'm 68. He's I think actually a couple years younger, but he made these exquisite puppets, not quite as beautiful as Teschner's, but way up there in terms of design, lots of texture and stuff. And I've done a whole interview and survey video of him on my Gravity from Above YouTube channel. And this is a Czech book of puppetry called The Puppet and the Modern. And they were gracious enough to make 2 editions of this, one in Czech, of course, and the other in English. This is the English edition, which was expensive, then became very cheap, and I got a couple of editions of this for friends of mine, and then is now really expensive. Books like this, very fascinating, and amazing documentation and photos and such like that. So we're now in my favorite section is Czech puppetry. Now one of the things as I'm pulling out here is the Czech Puppetry magazine, well over 100 years old, the oldest in the world, called Lotkarsh. I hope I said that right. Lotkarsh. And this is, I wrote an article on Georgian puppetry here, and you're looking at the photos of it. I'm in part of the story somehow. And then let's look at Karel Zeman. Karel Zeman is more of an animator, but he uses puppets and many other techniques in his films. And there is a museum of his work in Prague, right next to the Charles Bridge. And I got this book there, a great book. It is in Czech. I do wonder if there's an English edition somewhere, but that's okay. I'm getting it more. I have a lot of documentary material on him in the movies, and they also sell DVDs at the museum. But I got it for the imagery. Now, here is a general book on Czech puppet animation in English, and that's a fairly decent book. Now, here is an interesting book that I actually had some hand in, and this was from a museum show in Barcelona featuring Jan Švankmajer, the Quay brothers, and the early puppet animation of Ladislav Starovich. And my hand in this, I was actually invited to the show but couldn't make it because it was in Barcelona and I was in Alaska. But the point was, I passed a message from the granddaughter of Ladislav Starovich to the Quays, and that helped to put these things together in some way. I don't fully understand, but I know I had a hand in it. Great book of Jan Švankmajer's art. And here's another book of his art related to Alice in Wonderland. And if you've seen his film on that, certainly one of my favorite film versions of that. Not exactly for kids, although I do know children who've seen it by accident and loved it. This is from the Quay Brothers Museum of Modern Art in New York City exhibition. And it's a book, I think you can still find it online. It's probably getting a little bit more expensive now, but you should be able to find it for under, $40 or $30. And there's the title. So let's see, what else should we look at? Let's look at a few of the DVDs and Blu-rays of the Quay brothers, and we're not going to look at a lot of the videos, but since those were on the shelf next to it, I said, let's look at these. And now that we've seen it, let's look at those two shelves below the books. And what those are, it's mostly DVDs, a couple of Blu-rays, but it's mostly DVDs because this stuff is rare. Most people are not going to spend the money to make a Blu-ray out of it, but there's over 70 or more DVDs related to puppetry, puppet animation, and other related fields. And I actually have more that didn't show up in my boxes on dance and other theatrical things. But also in this, I do have a little section of regular animation, although, again, not all of those showed up. But there's some very interesting material there. I would say I easily have the best theater and puppetry collection in all of Georgia. Now, these are the main reason I wanted to go. This would be the first thing. These are my journals. Also my photographs. So looking at my journals. I started writing a journal in 1970 when I was 15. This is fascinating to me. It's actually inspired me. It's like I haven't been writing as much lately. I've been making more audio entries, but I need to write more. But these are my handwritten documents from when I hardly had a brain at all. Let's see. But here's an interesting one. This is a novel that I wrote. I look at it now as, we'll call it juvenilia. I wrote it while I was in New York, called A Stone Off the Edge. What's interesting is this is all printed up. I need to probably OCR these and get them on some sort of file, because right now they're up there. There's another edition of that. That was actually the version I gave to my mother and has my notes to my mother in the front. And this is all a book of short fiction that I wrote. And these again are typed up, but again, most of them do not exist in any sort of file form. So I need to get a printer to do that, and such is life. I hope I can find a good one here. If not, I'll have to order it and have it shipped in. Georgia is very strange. You cannot find a Blu-ray player here to save your life, or anything that'll play DVDs or CDs or anything. This is my real novel of the Five Masters of Reality. And as you can see, now this is a single page, lots of space. I was going to send this in, but now what I'm going to do is this year sometime, as soon as I can, I'm going to have that printed up on Amazon for pay-on-demand services. And this is what I really wanted. The Longhouse. This is 400 pages, handwritten, of my second novel. I don't count The Stone Off the Edge, although somebody might. And this is a book of my art. I went through a phase in the late 80s, early 90s, where I was searching for something in art, a lot of images of women, which I eventually figured out why I was doing, and I think discovering that kind of lessened my desire to continue this particular project. So there's a section in the middle that's unfinished, and I doubt I ever will finish it. Nevertheless, I think that book contains some very interesting ideas of mine. Let's see, what else have we got? Let's look down here. These are all the photos. I'm not going to show you too much of these, but let me show you. I've got a couple of photo albums, old school. These are from my Jesus People days, life on the Baraka House farm. Some of the people who showed up in the summer of '71. cows that I had personal relationships with. Yeah, quite interesting stuff. And let's see, let's go back even further into my early days. And you see, life on the farm. Donald Spitz picking some scab on his arm. And but if we go back, there I am at about 14 years old. There I am 6 or 7. And there's my grandmother, whom I never met, Dora Knutkowski-Taschuk from the Ukraine. And those 3 boxes are actually all of my letters that I rescued from Alaska. Thanks for coming along. I hope you found it interesting.